The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of March 1st, 2026. The podcast that's only me when I'm with you. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's deify the news of the bogus. So this is another case where we actually have to give the Trump administration its due. Kinda, sorta. We know that glyphosate is safe, and we've debunked the idiots like the Young Turks who claim it causes cancer. We've also debunked the WHO's moronic IARC for saying that it causes cancer, because they say that literally everything in the universe causes cancer. Seriously, there are no chemicals whatsoever listed in their category of non-carcinogenic to humans. But it provides an excuse for ambulance chasers to file lawsuits against Deep Pocket Monsanto, and it also gives leftists something to screech about when they want to convince you capitalism is evil. In actuality, as we covered, glyphosate is actually incredibly non-toxic and has never been shown to cause cancer. It's actually the safest herbicide we have, and modern farming would be much more difficult and expensive without it. So at the very least, the Trump administration has passed an order protecting the use of glyphosate as well as phosphorus fertilizers. Also, something national security. I guess everything is national security these days. They wrote, "Any interruption of supply of either of these critical materials could leave our defense industrial base and food supply vulnerable to hostile foreign actors." Phosphorus is not only a good chemical fertilizer, but it's also a precursor for glyphosate. The executive order says, "There is no direct one-for-one chemical alternative to glyphosate-based herbicides. Lack of access to glyphosate-based herbicides would critically jeopardize agricultural productivity, adding pressure to the domestic food system, and may result in a transition of cropland to other uses due to low productivity. Given the profit margins growers currently face, any major restrictions in access to glyphosate-based herbicides would result in economic losses for growers and make it untenable for them to meet growing food and feed demands." It also authorizes the federal government to, quote, "determine the proper nationwide priorities and allocation of all the materials, services, and facilities necessary to ensure a continued and adequate supply of elemental phosphorus and glyphosate-based herbicides." Of course, you could just free the market and let it allocate scarce resources, since that's what it does best. Oh, but wait. That might actually mean repealing the Agricultural Adjustment Act and overturning Wickard v. Filburn. Then, meat and produce might be a lot cheaper and also more widely available from small local farms. Then where would we be? But at least it's a way to stop idiots from banning these substances or miring the companies that make them in bogus lawsuits. Now, can we have our triphosphates back so we can have clean clothes and dishes again?
Presenting the greatest game this side of Yugoth. You are H.P. Lovecraft's cat, and your name is Nick. Right, we can't say that on a podcast. Well, anyway, that's the point. Your name is a joke, so now you are out for revenge. You become a Necronomicat. Using the Necronomicon, you come to the present day to buy a cat. That's a gun. For a cat. It's a fat cat. But the Necronomicon is treacherous, and it let in Lovecraft's monsters. Now, in a crumbling world, you must fight. Build your team, buy guns and armor, buy items of dubious legality, defeat the bosses of each level, then take Lovecraft down. Play Necronomicat. The link is at cat.bogosity.tv. Yeah, we're doing cat.bogosity.tv, not that other one. What, you want me to get kicked off the internet or something?
And another update to the Fulton County election shenanigans. At issue are over 600 boxes of 2020 general election records that were seized by the feds pursuant to a search warrant. Because apparently that's the only way we're going to get any kind of citizen review into what the hell was actually going on. The search warrant was also granted because of the threat of spoliation of evidence, which was very real because the clerk of court said she was going to destroy the ballots, making it impossible for anyone to review them. For all the screeching about how the ballots are totally legit and anyone who says differently is just a conspiracy theorist, Fulton County really doesn't want anyone else looking into it. So the search warrant was granted for the files, and later a judge said that the search warrant was valid so the feds can get them. Now, people from the Board of Commissioners, Board of Elections, and at the last minute, even the clerk of court are suing to stop it. They want the court to force the DOJ to give them back the evidence, and what was just dropped in the docket was the DOJ's reply in support of their motion to vacate the whole thing. When it appeared that it was all going to fail, because Fulton County didn't have legitimate possession of the documents, the clerk of court was added to attempt to fix that. Quote, "Their last-ditch joinder of the clerk does not move the needle, and their overheated response only confirms that their Rule 41G motion is defective as a matter of law, and an evidentiary hearing is unnecessary. They also say that a successful motion would result in, quote, a flood of immediate collateral attacks on search warrants issued across the district. Because if all you have to do is just file a motion, imagine. Those are my drugs! That's my heroin! Motion for hearing! That's my murder weapon! Motion for hearing! That's my stolen car! Motion for hearing! So all you'd have to do to evade a search warrant is go to a different judge and request an evidentiary hearing to override the ruling of the first judge, based on nothing more than, we wants the precious. As the DOJ points out in the motion, the 11th Circuit bars them from doing exactly that. The big tell is that Fani Willis and her cronies won't even drop it if the DOJ gives them what they say they want. Quote, petitioners bemoan that they have not been provided a copy of the seized materials, but they omit that the United States has repeatedly offered, in writing, to discuss providing the clerk an electronic copy in exchange for dismissing this case. Petitioners' refusal to engage that offer proves their goal is not to obtain copies of seized materials, but to interfere in the United States' investigation. Yeah, they don't want them examining those ballots to see if they're legitimate. Before, the claim was that none of the parties had a possessory interest, hence why the clerk of court was added. But as they say, the clerk's belated joinder does not get petitioners past the threshold, because even if she has a possessory interest, the clerk is still not a person aggrieved by the seizure of the records. To the contrary, the clerk has actively sought to divest or destroy the records. Oh, gee, imagine that. And they list a number of reasons for probable cause, including missing ballot images where the Shaw hash was missing and image files modified long after the election, duplicate ballots as undisputed and confirmed by the Secretary of State, boxes of identical pristine ballots, witness statements about substituting pristine ballots for genuine ones, and regarding unsealed boxes and unsecured ballots. Witness statements that tabulators were missing from some machines, one of which was used to close out 15 machines from 12 locations in violation of Georgia election rules. Protective counters were identical on 5 different tapes, and in some cases, the reported number of ballots exceeded the number counted on the odometer. And 36 errors of batch tallies, including duplicated or misidentified entries, including batch entries reflecting 100% of the vote for one candidate. Each one of those on their own could establish probable cause. There absolutely is evidence of election tampering here. They filed, instead of pointing to any ongoing important activity the petitioners were conducting with these records at the time of the seizure, they raise a host of irrelevant and unpersuasive political points. For instance, they claim a responsibility to separate fact from fiction. What does that even mean? And rebut unfounded attacks. That is a curious and self-defeating rationale, given that they flout binding 11th Circuit and Supreme Court case law at every turn, and also miserably fail to show a callous disregard of rights. Further, if, as petitioners claim, only the original unadulterated records can provide proof that citizens can trust the election process, that only confirms the United States' interest in retaining the original records away from a clerk that has stated she wishes to destroy them. We need these records to show the people the truth. Well, why do you want to destroy them then? They concluded, because no hearing is proper for all the reasons stated already, the court should quash petitioner's subpoena. For the foregoing reasons, the court should modify its scheduling order by vacating the evidentiary hearing scheduled for February 27, 2026, and the court could instead hold oral argument if the court would find it helpful. Instead, the judge continued the hearing and ordered the parties into mediation. What have I said before about how judges are cowards and wimps? What the hell is mediation going to accomplish? That's just the judge avoiding the one legal avenue open to him, which he knows will be unpopular with both his constituents and his deep state masters. Maybe one day we'll get an answer as to what was going on with the 2020 election. Or maybe we already know as much as we need to know, the links they'll go to keep people from knowing the truth. That should tell you everything about how little we can trust any of our elections, and that fair and honest elections in this country are the exception rather than the rule.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
And in this story, we have to give it to Google. They haven't exactly been great about this in the past. Normally they turn over user data at the drop of a hat, but now they're refusing to turn over user data in response to a DMCA lawsuit citing First Amendment concerns. Adult entertainment company FlavaWorks is suing alleged pirates for over $8 million in statutory damages, but they kind of have to know who they are. The users allegedly shared the videos on the private tracker gaytorrent.ru, but most of the defendants remain John Does even after a year. Flava blames Google for not meaningfully responding to their subpoena. Initially, Google claimed the subpoena was filed by a pro se party, but after Flava provided documentation that an Illinois attorney had signed it, Google requested a copy of the complaint. Shortly after, Google objected on First Amendment grounds, saying it could only provide data for the primary user, not the other John Does. Quote, Google raised a new objection based on potential First Amendment concerns, stating it would only produce information from the primary user who allegedly distributed the copyrighted works, and not the broader list of defendants. This is directly contrary to the purpose of the subpoena and the court's order authorizing early discovery. Google is objecting to turning over the personal information of 28 defendants who are known only by their Gmail accounts. Flava says that without Google's subscriber data, it can confirm their identities and name them in the lawsuit. Google didn't say exactly how the First Amendment comes into play here. Generally, rights holders identify pirates by joining a swarm, collecting IP addresses, and subpoenaing them en masse. But in this case, Flava somehow had usernames and email addresses as well. It may be because these individuals were subscribed to Flava, and Flava matched the IP addresses used to log in as those users. The issue, as critics have so often stated, is that an IP address doesn't distinguish individuals. The IP address you have now may have been used by someone else last week or yesterday. And of course, multiple users can exist on a single IP address through Wi-Fi and other NAT routers. That might pose a paradox for Flava. They need to establish who these people are to subpoena their records, but they need the records to figure out who they are. They filed, plaintiffs did not wish to name individuals in a federal lawsuit unless and until plaintiffs could confirm with reasonable certainty that the identified individual was in fact the person who engaged in the illegal infringing activity. Naming the wrong individuals in this case could embarrass the individuals named or expose plaintiffs to claims of abuse of process and waste the court's resources. The fact that Google was willing to turn over the primary user gives us the big clue as to what the issue is. The First Amendment isn't just about free speech, it also protects anonymity and association. Courts have recognized associational privacy concerns under the First Amendment in other contexts involving subpoenas. Although Google hasn't said directly, they seem to be taking the position that forcing it to disclose all of the subscriber data would mean turning over information on associates, which would violate freedom of association. Guilt by association is something the First Amendment roundly rejects. If Flava files a motion to compel, then Google would have to respond and explain the First Amendment rationale in more detail. Given that they haven't said much so far, it seems like it may be something novel, but every First Amendment battle is a good one. Broad subpoena powers involving compelled identification of anonymous users can chill lawful speech and association. Google may be attempting to trigger strict scrutiny to protect anonymity even in civil copyright cases. This might be one to keep an eye on.
I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv.
And now it's time to apotheosize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. Look, I know you're getting as tired of hearing about this as I am of covering it, but we gotta talk about measles again. A month ago, we gave you the bad news about the measles outbreaks and how measles numbers in 2025 were vastly greater than in previous years, all due to parents not vaccinating their children. Now the news has gone from bad to worse. Just 2 months into 2026, we're already at over half the number of measles cases as last year. Sadly, you've never been able to rely on the CDC's website for measles tracking since it ends up being woefully behind the current numbers. But their current number is 1,136, a number that is at least a week behind. As we reported, the total number for 2025 was 2,281, so the CDC's number is just under half. By now, it's almost certainly more than half. A week ago, when it was known the number of cases was over 1,000 but the CDC still said 982, Martha Edwards, president of the South Carolina chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, said, quote, "It is very concerning to see more than 1,000 cases in the U.S. this early in the year. Already we have more than half the number of cases seen in all of 2025. And the number of cases in 2025 was one of the highest annual case counts seen in decades. As people continue to believe inaccurate information about vaccines, and as non-medical exemption rates continue to rise throughout the country, we can expect case counts to continue to rise, threatening children and immunocompromised individuals with a disease that was nearly eliminated in our country through vaccination. That includes the South Carolina outbreak we discussed a month ago that spilled over into North Carolina. The most recent data I could find for that was 979 confirmed cases since October, just 5 months, so that one outbreak alone is outpacing 2025 as a whole. South Carolina State epidemiologist Linda Bell said, quote, "It is always concerning to see an increase in vaccine-preventable diseases in our communities. However, with a decrease in overall vaccination rates for diseases like measles, there are likely to be increasing numbers of these outbreaks in the future. This is especially true in areas where larger groups of unvaccinated individuals reside, as has been the case in Spartanburg County. That's in addition to the Arizona-Utah outbreak, likewise in counties such as Mojave County with lower vaccination rates. It's amazing how you can predict the location of these outbreaks just by the low vaccination rates. It's almost as if vaccines work or something. Once again, measles is not some harmless childhood illness. 1 in 5 unvaccinated people who get measles end up hospitalized. Common complications are pneumonia, brain swelling, often resulting in permanent brain damage, permanent damage to the immune system, and even death. Even if you survive the measles itself, years later you can get a fatal brain disorder called SSPE. Years! Long after the rash has gone away. Immune amnesia can wipe out all of the immunities you've built up, including all-important ones obtained in infancy, basically making you start over. And the immune system is not as good as learning about it as it was before, so you got your work cut out for you. Before widespread vaccination, measles killed millions every year. It wasn't better nutrition or clean water or anything that stopped that. It was vaccination. And when you vaccinate yourself and your children, you're not just protecting yourselves. You're protecting babies too young to be vaccinated, cancer patients on chemotherapy, people with immune disorders, pregnant women, and many others. With such a high reproduction number, you need 95% vaccination rates to have herd immunity, and measles will burst through any crack in that door. Vaccines are cheap, effective, and prevent so much death and misery. They're one of the most successful health inventions in human history. I don't care what your nostalgia is telling you. Look at the data, and the data are clear. With vaccination, measles is rare. Even a slight dip in vaccination rates, and you get outbreaks. At this point, I don't know how stupid you have to be not to accept that. So all of that makes RFK Jr. and all the other anti-vaxxers this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now let's hyper-ascensionationalicitate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And we're gonna be getting tired of the age verification crap, at least until people wise up and stop doing it. We've talked about the massive breaches of government IDs that are always associated with that. In particular, last year, when Discord's age verification got hacked, and 70,000 users got their identities stolen. Discord blamed their age verification partner and assured its UK users that this wouldn't happen again, since this time they went with Persona. And guess what just happened? Fortunately, it was White Hats who found the vulnerabilities, so this is a lesson learned without the worst happening. Assuming anyone actually learns it, of course. Security researcher Celeste, aka VM Funk, worked with 2 other hackers to check out Persona and see if they really were all that. They weren't. The hackers found a Persona front end exposed to the open internet on a US government authorized server, revealing 2,456 publicly available files. They also found the names of every single person responsible for it. The hackers wrote, "We didn't even have to write or perform a single exploit. The entire architecture was just on the doorstep. 53 megabytes of unprotected source maps, on a FedRAMP government endpoint, exposing the entire codebase of a platform that files suspicious activity reports with FinCEN, compares your selfie to watch list photos using facial recognition, screens you against 14 categories of adverse media from terrorism to espionage, and tags reports with code names from active intelligence programs. No systems were breached. No credentials were used. Every finding in this document comes from publicly available sources. Shodan, certificate transparency logs, DNS resolution, HTTP response headers, published API documentation, public web pages, and unauthorized JavaScript source maps served by the target's own web server. The information wants to be free. We didn't break anything. We didn't bypass anything. We queried URLs, pressed buttons, and read what came back. If that's enough to expose the architecture of a global surveillance platform, maybe the problem isn't us. Cybersecurity experts have been saying for years that any central repository of thousands of government IDs will always be a lucrative target for attackers. It's not a matter of if, but when. After this was revealed, Discord stated they won't be using Persona for identity verification. The question now is, who will be the next domino? The hackers said, stay curious, stay paranoid, rotate your keys, read your source maps, and if someone asks you to take a selfie to prove you're human, ask yourself who's on the other side of that camera and what list you just landed on. Knowledge is the only real currency. Everything else is just access control. So all of that makes Persona this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this That's Impossible, They're on Instruments edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord, Patreon, or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from H.L. Mencken. Government is a broker in pillage, and every election is sort of an advance auction sale of stolen goods. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.